Welcome back, y'all. Today we are going to be talking about how to develop internal controls for your nonprofit. Now, if you are a nonprofit, you already know you're dealing with the funds that come from donors, funders, grantors, but there's an expectation on how you spend those funds and how you steward those funds and making sure that you don't misappropriate assets, right? That is where internal controls come in. Internal controls make sure that your organization is operating with integrity, that there are parameters involved, and that you are making sure that there is a way to tell if something is broken, if there is something foul going on. So if you have some at your nonprofit, but you're like, how do I make sure that they're working? Or if you don't have any, let's chat. So what are internal controls? Internal controls are processes that are put in place to ensure the integrity of your financial reporting and regulatory compliance. They are also put in place to prevent misuse and misappropriation of assets. We know that sometimes when people hear nonprofits, they immediately start thinking of the scandals and money being stolen or funneled elsewhere. And so it's really important to make sure that your organization has strong internal controls, right? So that funders know, okay, I can trust them with this money. And then also when the auditors come in and do their independent audit, they can provide a stamp of approval to say, yes, this organization takes their funding seriously, they have internal controls implemented, and they are actually following them. Now, internal controls are critical because we want to be trusted, right? We want to be trusted, and we want the reputation of the organization to be one of strength, one that indicates that we properly steward our funds, and one that says, yes, you can give to us because we actually do what we say we're going to do. And so really quickly, I'm going to walk you through the 5 components of internal controls, and then we'll talk about how to develop them, and I'll give you some examples. So the first component is the control environment. Now, you may or may not have heard of what's called the tone at the top. So essentially, this means that management and the board of directors first have to set the example that internal controls are important, because as lower level employees looking up to these leaders, to management, to the board, they have to see that this is important to the organization. It doesn't have the same feel if you are sharing, training, showing, talking about internal controls, but management doesn't follow them, the board doesn't follow them. It loses its luster, right? And so the idea is that the environment has to be set at the top, and then that trickles down to employees and lower level staff. The second component is risk assessment, right? So you have to consistently be assessing risk in the organization and determining where are the areas, right, that are susceptible to misuse, or are there any gaps or holes in our process? Maybe at one point the internal controls were working when you were a $500,000 organization, but now that you've grown to a $2 million organization, that might need to be adjusted, right? Because you're managing more funds. The third component is monitoring. So it's important that when you put these internal controls in place, you don't just set it and forget it. You have to know that it's working. You have to monitor it. You have to make sure that what you said you're doing, you're actually doing, and it's working. And that's where that monitoring comes into play, right? Self-explanatory. The fourth component is information/communication, and really what that means is that you have to make sure that the right information is falling into the right hands and to being communicated to the right people. So if I am a staff member and I am meant to do a certain thing, how do I know that, right? Does it live in the policies and procedures? Are you training me? Is there a certain onboarding process that I have to go through? You have to make sure that that information is being communicated, because if it is not, then it's going to be very difficult to hold someone to a standard that they don't know about, right? Or if they actually do violate said control, but they don't really know that it's in place, it's going to be really hard to reprimand. So you have to make sure that you have a process in place to communicate the right information and to the right people. And the last component is control activities. And these are the actual like processes, policies, procedures. Like these are the actual things that you have in place to ensure the integrity, right, of the financial data and regulatory compliance. So these are the very tangible things that people are supposed to be doing to make sure, right, that things are operating as they should. So let's talk through how do you actually develop these things and these controls and some examples, right? Because it might be easier to understand by looking at some specific examples. So what does it look like to implement internal controls into your organization? Well, first you want to consider the size of your organization. If you are small, you will have to be creative, right? Because that means that there are less people. You tend to maybe be using a little bit more tech, leaning a little bit more into process. And so you have to make sure that controls are implemented in the necessary places. I recommend taking the different areas one at a time, right? So that may be looking individually at the accounting process, looking individually at the HR process, the IT process, right? And tackling it from there. And as you take a look at each of these individual areas, going from top to bottom as to what is it that we do right now and where are the gaps, right? Because that will tell you where control needs to be put in place, right? And so it's going to be important to map that out, identify the gaps, and then determine what the control is going to be. Now, some examples, so because we are accountants over here, we're going to stick to the accounting function, right? And so let me give you a little example. So we like to say no one person should be responsible for a process from start to finish. And an example of that would be the person who receives checks in the mail shouldn't also be able to deposit said checks, right? Because we know that if you receive the money, how do we also confirm that one, what was received, who it was from, the amount, and how do we confirm that that was actually what was deposited? We need to break that up, right? That needs to be done by more than one person. Another example, as we think about like cash or payments, right, is requiring 2 signatures on a check that is above a certain amount. You know, at one organization, it was $5,000 that I was at, and the check had to be signed by the treasurer and the executive director. So there were 2 eyes on it, right? So if one was saying, yeah, you know, $5,000 is fine because maybe something weird was going on, the other person could be like, $5,000 to this person, that seems odd. What's going on here, right? There's checks and balances. So those are 2 examples. But let's go a little further. Another area to think about is payroll, right? You have some people who will make up phantom employees. Same thing with vendor payments. So periodically reviewing the vendors, payments being made to these vendors, making sure it makes sense, making sure you know who these vendors are, that there are agreements in place, that there is supporting documentation, right, for these payments, right? Just to give you an example of how we do it here, we do bill pay for some of our clients, but the system that we use has it set up that we don't also, you know, enter and pay and manage the backup without any checks or balances, right? And so we get that, you know, payment request, we put it through, but then someone else on the client side actually has to review it, the amount, the backup, and give the go ahead, click approve or whatever the case may be before a said payment can be actually made, so that there's never just we are responsible for that entire process and you can't even tell until after payment has gone out that, oh man, you paid so-and-so when you really weren't supposed to, or you paid so-and-so and that is not a real person, because it happens, okay? And some very like simple, straightforward examples are reviewing the reconciliations monthly, right? Having a policy around reimbursements, having a policy around credit card use, right? Having thresholds for where certain documentation is required or certain authorization is required. The idea is that you just don't let staff move all willy-nilly without there being parameters around being able to do certain things, or also not being able to do certain things. So, you know, with QuickBooks Online, you can have multiple people having access to the tool, but should everyone have the same access? No, because if you're responsible for payroll, then should you even be touching the reconciliation module? Probably not, right? So it's all in just thinking through the function that you are working through at the time and identifying areas where there could be a possible misuse of funds, or where something could potentially go wrong wrong, or where fraud could happen, right? You want to make sure that you lessen the risk as much as possible. Now, again, the types of controls are really going to be dependent on your organization, but having them is non-negotiable, and having solid ones says to your funders, your auditors, anyone who is a user of the financial statement, anyone who is giving to the organization, that you take your organization's reputation and integrity seriously. So if this video was a surprise, or if watching this video you realize like, hey, we haven't done a review of our controls in quite some time, then you definitely want to do that. If you have questions on certain controls you can put in place, or even just specific scenarios that you might want my eyes on, drop it in the comments and let's chat. I hope that this video was helpful. I hope that you've implemented some internal controls. And if you have not, that needs to be your first order of business. I'll see you guys in the next video.